Minutes past 8.
And you're listening to Morning Reports. A promise by the Green Party to make the work diaries of their ministers open to public scrutiny is being welcomed by Victoria University political analyst Bryce Edwards. Dr. Edwards has been critical of political commentators who appear in the media, including on RNZ, without declaring their political affiliations and associations. He's also worried about lobbyists who also work for ministers. Well, at the weekend, the Greens said they'd start releasing their ministers' diaries so the public could see who they had been meeting and why. Dr. Edwards is in the Wellington studio. Good morning.
Morning, Susie.
So, specifically about the Green Party, you must see this as a big win.
Oh, this is huge progress for transparency and against vested interests. At least we know who the ministers are meeting with. It's not all the ministers, of course, it's just the Green ministers. And we'll now, every 3 months, get this published and we'll know the diaries, who they met with. I think they'll also explain the general gist of those meetings. Second to that, the Greens, all their MPs as well as their ministers, all their staff, are now going to refuse all gifts from outsiders, from corporates, etc. These are the tickets to events. This is, the products from companies. They'll no longer receive those, and that's again, I think, quite a sensible measure if you're going to be against, like the Green Party have. They've always talked a lot about vested interests, about money in politics being a problem. They're putting their money where their mouth is.
What about other parts of the government, Labour in New Zealand first? Will this bring pressure to bear on them to do the same sort of thing?
I think so, yes. This is quite embarrassing, I think, for Labour and New Zealand First, because there'll be questions asked about who they're meeting with now, and there will be pressure on them to follow the lead of the Greens. And of course, we've got Claire Curran. She's the new Minister for Open Government. Really, it should have been her announcing this. So the Greens, I think, are probably trying to differentiate themselves. This is green branding.
This is not just about who they meet, perhaps, but also it has sparked quite a lot of interest around lobbyists who work within Parliament, within the government potentially, but also commentate outside of that. And there have been various ones that I suppose I could cite. In some ways, is this essentially just about disclosure? If people say, this is my affiliation, or this is what I do, or I've done some work for that person, is that actually all that matters?
I think it's very hard to regulate these things, whether we're talking about lobbyists working for government, or lobbyists lobbying government, or lobbyists in the media. But at least if the public knows, and if declarations are made, the audience can judge. So I don't think there's anything to say that we should never have lobbyists on Radio New Zealand or any other media programs. Sometimes they're actually really insightful political commentators, and they provide information, and they're very useful.
This is the tension, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you get someone who's perhaps very well connected, who is an insider, and so to get their perspective is one that you're not going to get if you simply go for the impartial journalist line.
Although I do have a sense in which people in PR and lobbying are kind of overtaking the whole area, and we've got it out of proportion. We've got a lot more of lobbyists involved in political commentary. But yeah, they do have a place. But at the moment, I think the media especially are a bit lax in making sure these declarations are known, because the audience just needs to judge. But it's not just media as well. It's lobbyists going into working for government that I have a beef with at the moment. I think there's more serious issues there with conflicts of interest.
Is this where you're talking particularly about the Prime Minister's office?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's been a couple of recent incidents where the Prime Minister's office has employed lobbyists or PR people to come in. The most obvious one was Gordon John Thompson. He came in as the Chief of Staff for about 4 months over summer to help Jacinda Ardern set up the government. Meanwhile, he is a lobbyist and he owns a lobbying company. He's a director of that lobbying company. And the extraordinary thing is, this does happen quite a bit. You get people that are working for the government or in political parties that go off to be lobbyists after their time in politics. In his case, he declared before taking up this job that he would only do it for a few months and then he'd go back to being a lobbyist, which I don't think I've ever heard of in New Zealand politics before, and it creates all sorts of questions. And of course, the Beehive isn't answering those questions. They say it's an employment matter and it's something for ministerial services to deal with. It's not us, but it really is quite.
This is the specifically. So with GJ Thompson, what do you see as being the issues that may have been pushed, or the situations that may have been raised as a direct result of him doing that job within the Prime Minister's office?
Well, it's really just a question of who his clients are and whether they were declared to the Prime Minister, and what this means for him after being the Chief of Staff. He takes away all his networks from that job, all his inside information. He would have had access to all the cabinet papers, the briefings from SIS, GCSB, Treasury, particularly on the staff members that he hired himself in the Beehive. Of course, he helped set up all these jobs, and then he has those contacts. So I can't see how those conflicts of interest are easily managed by the Prime Minister.
How do people manage conflicts of interest like this?
I'm not sure I can answer that. Like I say, the main thing is to clear them and to step aside whenever those clients, come up in conversations and dealings when they're working in government. But I just think it's easier for for politicians to maybe not hire lobbyists and PR people all the time.
If people are professionals, though, which I guess you have to assume they are, does looking at it in this particular lens or through this particular lens, does that make it look grubby when perhaps it may not be?
Yeah, of course, and that's absolutely the problem. And I think throughout the world at the moment, we've got this growing unease about elites and about vested interests and about this kind of political class whereby you've got lots of people in media, politics, lobbying, all sort of, being friends and switching sides. And you've got lots of politicians at the moment leaving Parliament, going into being directors of boards and things. It's a lot of murkiness, and I just think it's going to lead to a lot of people having less faith in the political system.
Does it do a disservice, though, to the public? Because if you do take people out of the situation where they are able to comment in the media, perhaps, the Matthew Hootons of this world, I know he's someone else who's been caught up in some of this with the NBR. If you take people out of the arena, does that then mean that actually the public end up getting less information, and so that's no good to them either?
I think that is the risk. So we actually need a wider debate about this. I'm not coming in here and saying, yes, lobbyists should never be involved in any of this. I think lobbying actually has an important place in the political system even. You do need to be able to talk to the decision makers, give them information. So it's really mainly about opening it up. It's about transparency. It's about declaring these conflicts of interest. Not a lot of that's happening at the moment.
And what about you? Any conflicts to declare?
No, I work as an academic in teaching and research. I don't support any political party. I don't even vote. So I try to be as objective as possible. Were you an Alliance staffer at one point? A long time ago, 2001, I worked for Jim Anderton. He was the Deputy Prime Minister at the time. I worked for 6 months in 2001 as in an admin role. Before Jim Anderton fired me, actually. So that's probably my only conflict. Thank
you very much for your time this morning. Bryce Edwards there in our Wellington studio. He's from Victoria University. Thank you very much for coming in. It's 26 minutes to 9.